Agile is a very considered step. It's not one that you throw a bit of labor around and suddenly you're Agile. These are three very management time intensive steps to get to be Agile, to be very robust and resilient in how you serve your customers. The customer doesn't care that there's a geopolitical thing going off. They don't care. They'll find another source. And if you're trying to build a very strong relationship with your customer to build loyalty, you have to have a stock on your shelf or on your website when they expect it to be there. It doesn't matter what you're facing. And one of the ways of overcoming those things that get in the way is to adopt an Agile mindset and develop those Agile capabilities and capacities through developing different ways of looking at the world, different systems to integrate how your extended supply chain actually works together. And the big win, the consumer wins all the time because you're giving a great service. But the big win for the whole retail ecosystem is we're actually joined up on this. Welcome and thank you for joining me today. My name is Gary Newbury. I'm a senior executive on call helping businesses in the make, move, sell flow of consumer goods and services. My purpose is to inspire business leaders, particularly those within the consumer products and retailing space, to think big, be bold, scale, adapt and win, one epic supply chain transformation at a time. There's additional content available through my website, RetailAID.ca, or on my YouTube channel, RetailAID. Be sure to check it out. As the business world faces much volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, organizations need to be tapping into resources with an inside edge on transitioning their teams to be agile, innovative, and digital, with thought leaders, experts, and senior executives who have mastery of operational turnarounds and strategic transformations to help reorientate their enterprises. There's great material to get through here, so let's get started.
How would you describe what you do? How should we tell the outside world about you?
My purpose in life is to inspire retail business leaders to think big, be bold, and to win one epic supply chain transformation at a time. An exec on call in retail supply chain and the last mile. Retail supply chain includes manufacturing, third-party logistics, wholesaling, obviously retailing, and the last mile. So when I talk about the retail supply chain, it's not the four walls of a retailer, it is actually that extended end-to-end supply chain.
And do you want to tell me a little bit about your background, your experience, that type of thing? Sure.
I started life as an accountant. And after a few years of doing that, I got quite bored. My last full-time finance role was as CFO or finance director in England. At a company called AH Distribution. It was the fastest growing third-party logistics organisation at that time in the mid-90s. I'd just come away from doing a big outsourcing of storehouses, internal logistics to Excel primarily, but there were many other carriers involved. So storehouse, for people who may not be familiar with that, was the holding company or the conglomerate that had brands such as British Home Stores, Mothercare, Habitat, Richards, Hills, Blazer, Yakety. There was about 16 brands in there, and I can't remember them all now. It was a little while ago. But I had about 17, 18 years of working for myself across that extended supply chain, helping companies often with mission critical challenges they faced, where often it was they were pointing at the warehouse and saying they're just not cutting it, they just can't get stuff out on time, and often found that the root cause of that was somewhere else. Sometimes it was the management team, sometimes it was something that fed into the warehouse. When I came to Canada, I had a long-term contract with a company called Golden Food Service, which is obviously a food service company, one of two major providers in Canada. The last project I was engaged with was the onboarding of the M&M Food Market food chain, which is basically an equivalent of a small format version of Iceland, I'd almost say B-Jams. then, and onboarded that into the GFS network, and got that off to I wouldn't say a bumpy start, and then moved on to my own endeavours to try and develop my own business as an executive on call.
Brilliant, thanks. And so I guess all my questions are around the agile supply chain.
Yeah.
So for me and for anyone else in the world who's looking for a crash course in this, how would you describe an agile supply chain?
Well, I think it's probably worth talking about what an existing supply chain looks like.
Yep.
Start there, and we can see some of the foibles and some of the misunderstandings that have been embedded into how we think about the supply chain, and particularly business in a wider context. But if we think about one of our supply chains like apparel, and so over a few decades, we found somewhere in the Far East where it's really super cheap to, the labour costs are so cheap, the regulations around are so vague, that we've decided to move it from a domestic production, because it's fully regulated, high wage costs, capital intensive, we have to invest in all that. And we've outsourced it to places in China and the Far East, which means that, and because the minimum physical movement is typically a container, so we found that instead of us being able to use local production, say, can you send us, 2 weeks worth of this kind of fashion design, bring it into the stores, check it out. Does it work? No, fine, stop that. Right, make it this, on a very quick and easy basis, because you're working very closely, you're not losing time with the physical distance. Instead of that, the apparel retail supply chain tends to work on, I'm planning out the season, I do my assortment plan, I'm going to use this supplier in China because they're dead cheap and I can make my gross margin. So I'll have to take a punt, I'll have to guess what my market will look like in 6 months' time and place an order now, get them to produce it, bring it over in various containers, and often there's a minimum order quantity because you're not working with them, you're just saying, here's my order, get it done. They bring it in, it fills up the warehouse, the season comes, they spill it out into stores, and guess what? The first couple of weeks, it's not too bad. The next couple of weeks, they're marking down by 10%, 20%, 30%. And after, halfway through the season, it's not shifting. We have to do something desperate, like, all right, 70% markdown, great sale, promote it, flyers, you name it, they're doing it. It's not moving, and then it ends up being cleared, and it could be cleared in store, cleared through a brokerage, or cleared into a place like Winners or something like that, where they buy, 10 cents on the dollar for your product, or maybe charity, or most likely landfill. So that's the kind of supply chain thinking that we've been using for a number of years, sometimes a number of decades.
Yeah.
Very inefficient, creates lots of waste, and you have to think, you can't respond to current trends, you have to think what that trend might look like, put all your plans together, place your order, and hope. It's all is a hope-based supply chain design. And the other factor that's often overlooked here, but because it's disguised under the word called lean. Oh, we run lean supply chain. No, you don't. Lean has a very, very clear meaning. It's a very clear methodology. And when I look at most supply chains, there's not very much lean going on here. What it is for each of the elements within the supply chain, the supply base, the movement from where the manufacturer is to the dock, from the dock to dock, and from the dock to maybe a railhead, through to a place close to the DC, road, whereas each of these elements is cost optimized in such a way that when you look across the supply chain, just within what a retailer normally controls, there's lots of weird stuff going on. Why would you do that and cause a cost over here? Because it's unintegrated, it's unjoined up. So lots of retailers, certainly in I think in the 90s and the 2000s, everyone was talking about joined up thinking in the UK when I was there. But I don't see very much of it certainly appearing in the supply chain world. It's very dysfunctional, individual element cost optimized. So that's a traditional thing. I don't know if you've seen anything that's not like that, which is still in that general mode. But an agile supply chain is a completely different kettle of fish. And if we look at the apparel and we look at something like Inditex or Zara, they have a completely different way of thinking about things. Inditex, Mrs. Jones goes into, the Zara shop. Oh, I wish that was in like blue and with a different styling. And somebody's writing that down somehow. I don't know the detail of how it works, but somebody writes down a chitty, they send it off to their designers. The designers then work out what that means, and they look across other things and say, oh, look, there does seem to be an emerging style requirement that's in. So all they do is that they brought loads of raw material in, and all they do then is say, oh, we don't like blue, we want orange. Okay, so we take this, let's say, blank raw material, ram it through the paint tray, that's a better way of putting it, cut it to this new style, and using their global transportation systems, they can have that specific color, that particular style, hopefully in various sizes, in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So they can get right out in front of an emerging trend and respond to it really fast. So I suspect they don't do very many markdowns. They do probably full price or clearance. It's like, this has run its course. So they do small quantities, very focused on what it has been an emerging trend.
Sure.
I would say that's a fairly good example of agile thinking in action.
So are we saying that, I don't actually know where Zara's things are made. Are Zara's items made closer to the consumer?
I think they've got maybe a mixed manufacturing capacity. I think the designers, as I understand it, the designers certainly sit in Spain, the ones that I've read about, and I don't know if the actual production plant is actually in Spain as well. And they may have multiple manufacturing facilities using, global transportation systems, which tend to be marine, sometimes air, to get it to market in 2 weeks. That's their kind of proposition is we'll understand what you think you need. We'll see if there's enough demand for it. We'll make it and get it back on the shop floor in 2 weeks. That's a mammoth task. If you can imagine trying to do that, if we've got a local apparel retailer called Reitman's, if you said to them, I want customers to come into your store, and in 2 weeks, when they express their preference, I want you to have that style, that size, color, whatever, on your shop floor in 2 weeks. So go, give us 6 months to work out.
I was wondering, is an agile supply chain more relevant to one type of retailer than another? Are there any categories where it's easier to set up an agile supply chain versus ones that might struggle?
I think it applies to all categories, and I'm sure that as I think about it, there might be a few quirks in that. But if we think about agile, if we literally take the description of a word, agile, it means to kind of be able to move easily. And if we substitute move easily to think easily, and agile is definitely a mindset. If we think about what's happened to grocery over the last year with the pandemic and everyone rushing out and buying toilet rolls and all the normal stuff, and the demand pattern for staples has gone off the Richter scale. It's really been, the data we've had for the last 10, 15, 20 years has now been proved to be very unreliable as a predictor of what's happening today in the store. And there's been mixed changes. If you look at the whole economy, we've had, certainly in North America, we've seen a massive spike in household goods like appliances, furniture. You can't find lumber. If you can find it, you're having to pay 3 times the amount that you used to pay literally a year ago. That's how it's really moved forward. And also, because we're in Ontario as we speak, that we're in lockdown, so we had a complete collapse of the apparel industry. then a murmur up in February when we opened up again,
Yeah.
obviously through summer as well. And then it's gone down again. So we're in lockdown because guess what? Most of the apparel retailers are in mal situations, which are closed down. So does Agile work in most categories? I'd say yes. And the apparel one, toys, electrical product, anything where you're having to take you're using a forecast to base an order of a certain duration. Maybe that duration is more than a week or two. When it gets into months, these are the things where you could apply it, but you have to approach it with a very different mindset, and you have to approach it from a point of view, this is going to cost us a lot of money to create both the capacity and the capabilities to do things in a different way. But actually, when we're there, to be able to move or think very quickly about things and not to make it look like a firefight.
What does an agile supply chain in grocery look like? Because it sounds like the biggest challenge is on the factory side. How does a factory 1 week produce incredible amounts of toilet paper and then scale that down? How does it respond to these sometimes big changes whilst also being profitable?
This is a really interesting question, because from where we are now, if we rush around and try and we can claim to be agile because we rushed around, we've thrown labor at it. We're working extra shifts, we're laying on extra transportation and all this kind of stuff. It's all knee jerk. It's like we've got this demand, we didn't anticipate it, and we've got no physical capacity in the short term except for expanding our shifts. And that's it. Once we run out of shifts, 24 hours, 7 days a week, what do we do? Because we haven't made arrangements with our supply base to be able to dual or triple or quadruple our supply network very quickly. We're not linked with it. We just place the order. Maybe we do it by email. We're teched up. So when I think about here, fortunately we had a domestic producer of toilet rolls called Irvin in the maritime provinces, but they bump into capacity issues very quickly because they hadn't set up the infrastructure to be able to toggle quickly and say, okay, we've got this extra demand. It may be a mix change, different brands, or just sheer volume, the same brand being, I suspect. They didn't have the infrastructure in place or the technology in place to be able to switch them very quickly to put that demand out to different factories. What you're hitting on is, can you be agile from here, from a standing start? And I think the answer is absolutely not. So anybody who's claiming that they went in with a traditional supply chain, and in the space of a year when everybody was worried about keeping the shelves full or scaling up that e-commerce or even getting a click and collect operation under, they were not working on things like blockchain, control towers, and extending the reach of their ERP systems and developing collaborative new supplier relationships. They weren't doing any of that. They were just working harder. They were doing more of the same, but more of it. Let me go back to the food one, because you did raise a question about food.
Yeah.
But in Canada, we used to produce a lot of stuff internally, and there were some intricate market interventions by government over a long period of time. We've got a thing called supply management, which kind of supports the farmers, but they end up overproducing and dumping. And this is the missing link here, that when we in Canada reduced our production capabilities domestically, we outsourced it to initially maybe America, China, and other places. It meant that we had a very restricted capacity to do anything. And then we had COVID rules on top of it, which meant you had to space out. And so we didn't have plan B. We never had a plan B. We just said, let's get lean. No, it just meant let's strip out costs carelessly, because there is a risk of other things besides pandemics, natural disasters, geopolitical challenges, legislative changes. There could be a whole range of things, and you need to, as a business, be prepared for that. You need to move from what you know to much more scenario planning as a way of thinking about the world. And
I was thinking it might be the machinery, but it's actually as much the thinking and the strategizing as the tech or the machinery and the tech that you use to support your supply chain.
Yeah, I think there's 3 steps, and I don't know if you want to go into them now, but I think I've touched a lot on the first one, which is a mindset change. I have what I call the 5 configurable elements of transformational change: process, systems, architecture, culture, and KPIs. And using that kind of framework, I can develop a 3-step process. The first one is about mindset, which is typically expressed through culture. How do we change the way we think and make decisions? And perhaps within a retailing environment, we might actually have to look at things like reinvention. We may have to reinvent our business model. We may have to reinvent our retail concepts, our organizational structure, because there's some real kind of weird stuff going on in traditional retailing, which I think will really come out of the woodwork pretty soon. And the mindset is about how do we scenario plan, and what are the common themes here, and how do we develop both capacities and capabilities to be able to switch across these options. So this happens, all right, we've got that covered, bang. This happens, oh, we've got most of that done, and this happens, well, actually, we never thought that it would ever happen. It was a scenario, but honestly, we evaluated that would never happen, but it has happened. So, but we're in a culture that says we're going to find a way through this in a kind of easy way that's not firefighting and panicky and stressful for people. We just kind of think through, what have we got? We've got these capacities, we've got these capabilities, which may be in various stages of being used or not used. How do we reconfigure this to be able to deliver the value to the customer? Because of this has actually happened, and we didn't anticipate that really happening anytime soon.
Right.
The second stage then is to what does that actually mean when we say develop capacities and capabilities? Is actually looking at things in a different way. So if we look at our supply base, typically we could think, because the economic model that we've been brought up on is like, if we just go to one supplier, we get a big discount. We get this, we can hop over the minimum order. We get it all in containers with full of our stuff, really cheap to move it versus individuals, bring it into our network, very cheap, great. However, if we have a wobble, like the pandemic, something interrupts our operation, we don't have a plan B. We can't switch into something, or we can switch, but we're now competing with our competitors here because they're probably using a similar way they manage their suppliers. What we need to do is have 3 or 4 suppliers all lined up, all teched up, all maybe blockchained up, where we can actually see what capacities they have, so that as we go through the day, we don't need a pandemic. We just look at what's the optimum way of having this product produced, ideally relatively cost effectively, but we keep those facilities, we toggle our demand across those. And similarly, when we look at the physicality of the movement from, the factory to domestic, we may actually say, you know what, it's a bit more expensive to run it by plane, but guess what? We're going to do it now and again. We're going to try this supplier, get them to get it on the plane and bring it over. Okay, it's going to cost a little bit more, but we're using that capability. We're demonstrating, we're practicing that habit that when something happens, we just switch. Our systems are all geared up to be able to switch, not go, what do we do? Oh, put it on a plane. Oh, how do we do that? So it's really agility, much the same as an athlete. Well, he or she will line up for a 100-meter run. They do lots of other things, mental preparation. They do lots of different practices. They position themselves, for that first microsecond when they practice everything, but they use the practice as part of their normal business. When we look at a warehouse, we may choose to build extra capacity. And, the conversation I related to earlier on, when say, if I was there as an interim executive that said, we're going to be, you've asked me to be agile, right? I'm going to be agile now. So I want to spend $2-3 million on an empty warehouse.
Right.
And everyone go, well, hang on, hold the bus. This doesn't work. said no, because we have scenario planned and we've done this, and this makes complete and utter sense.
So it is the opposite. It's not exactly the opposite of lean, but yeah, you can see how it butts up against the lean strategy.
We're building capacity ahead of demand, and most people have been brought up on a diet of you wait until a demand, then you build up capacity. So that the traditional, if you look at a third-party logistics company taking on a new customer, somewhere they found some space, maybe they've lost a customer, so they brought in, say, Homebase into the network, and that'd be a big job. But let's say everyone's patting themselves on the back. You've got this big contract from Homebase, and we've got 100,000 square foot warehouse. We're going to do this line or these lines or class going through this warehouse. Great. And the first thing that happens, you get this J curve effect. So everyone's slapping themselves on the back, and the first thing that they notice when they start looking at their accounts, their management accounts, is they go into losses on this contract. And it's whether or not they hope, because they've seen this over and over again, they hope it turns into profit, but they have to spend a lot of management time, maybe making a few more capital investments into it to try and get it into a profitable stream. Because they didn't have the capacity in the first place. They had it, but they didn't see it in the way of agile thinking. They just saw we've got a gap in the warehouse, we've got to fill it with a customer. Let's just get anyone. Hopefully they're somewhat compatible with our systems and our ways of working. Get them in, but it will pretty much always very predictable.
Hang on, we've got mindset, number one.
The second one is to look at options and to exercise those options.
Yeah.
So spread your supply base for a particular product across a number of different suppliers. And that would be, for me, that'd be more about the architecture and the process, is making sure that everybody's working to a consistent level of quality, how we do things, understanding how we place orders and standard lead times. And so that's about process and architecture. The third one, which is more about systems, is about implementing systems that give visibility, instructions and control, and automate those instructions, so that if a certain thing happens, so you're looking at, say, 4 suppliers who can make the same product, and you've got a preferred choice, but you can see that they, because you're working your systems actually go in and support you or even replace their production planning system. You can see their capacity to satisfy your next demand. You just switch it. You just switch the order, and it's nothing personal, because they can, if you're in a slightly different mindset, they all see the same picture, and of course they all agree with the decision. You've got supplier A, pretty much flat out. Supplier B, you've got a few gaps, but not enough really to satisfy this demand. But factory C actually got quite a lot of capacity, so I'm going to switch it to go straight to C, because I know their capacity, because my systems go into their systems and I see this. And my system, because of the algorithm, how they're configured, just naturally do that. And maybe there's a step in it. Do you want to do this? Yes, get on with it. It's not an exception.
Yeah.
So having that visibility is a major step. None of these steps are easy, trust me, but having that visibility of all that capacity and or capabilities that you have at your fingertips through deploying systems. But it's not just deploying systems, it's actually building those trusting relationships, those collaborations that allow everybody to win in this competition. Currently, with traditional retail thinking, it's like call the supplier in, squeeze them down, tie them up, and then change a spec halfway through, which makes it easier for you to serve your customer, but more expensive for them to support you to do that. And it's very negative. I think that what we're seeing, and we will see an acceleration of increasing D2C brands going direct to consumers. They've always wanted to go straight to consumers so they can pick up the real insights that they're after to understand where they need to start pointing their innovation to, rather than going through either market research or through the retail channel, where you get a mixed picture of information. I see it all the time in the news feeds I receive, is that this company's going D2C, they're dumping their wholesale arrangements, they're coming out of retail, whatever it is, and they're going direct initially through some kind of marketplace, which might be Amazon, Walmart, whatever, and then they're also trying to do it themselves. And there's so many things going for them right now. This would be, if you go back 10 years, if I said micro fulfillment centers, I'd go, what? Even 5 years, people go, well, what's that? But now it's part of the language of, certainly in food and many other industries, they're thinking of like putting storage of the stuff which used to go into the back room and get forced down into the shelves. So you had to have wide shelves to actually have this in the back to keep the stock, so you can feed the stock in daily into the store, so you can have shorter shelves, but you can keep them full. And also facilitate online services like BOPIS, buy online, pick up in store, curbside, click and collect, and or home delivery, or delivery to a point of convenience.
I do feel for retailers sometimes, because they've got to do so much for all these different options and train all their people on all these different things, and they've got their work cut out for them. Having a supply chain that can respond to all this demand, how it might change from day to day. Who would you say are the kings of Agile? So obviously Zara are a great example. Are there any other examples from different categories that you think are amazing examples?
A lot of people have said they've become Agile, and as I mentioned earlier on, it's just doing more of the same they've been doing for the last years or decades. So there's not many real good examples of Agile. I think ASOS might be another one, but I don't know enough about their supply chain, that they can change things within a week apparently and have it delivered to you same day. That's pretty good going. But then I start to think, in response to your question, is like maybe companies like Toyota, because if we think about it a different way, and take it from a consumer's point of view, that I romp up to the dealer, they may have a car in the lot, in which case they're selling me that, but I say, what I want is a Corolla, it needs to be red, it needs to have black interior, it needs to so I take the order down, and depending on where they are in their cycle, I could probably have that in a week. A highly customized version of a bog standard vehicle, or a Toyota Corolla or something like that. They could customize that and have it to me pretty quickly, because they've organized it's lean, but I don't see much difference between technical lean, the lean methodology, and how Agile works. There's a lot of overlap. Right. For them to be able to customize something to seat color, something on a fascia, different types of wheels, engine, color, you name it, they can make that happen. Because they've geared up their systems, they've organized their suppliers to bring it in literally just in time. And that's, in some ways, that's what we're thinking in Agile. I did a number of projects some time ago in the UK where I looked at some of the issues the company was facing around production planning and the cycle time between, if I get an order and it's on the shelf in the warehouse, it gets served next day, say. If it's in production, it could be another 2 or 3 weeks before it emerges from production, goes into warehouse, and then can be served to the customer. But if that item is not in production, it has to be entered into the production plan, and it's a weekly cycle, 2-weekly cycle for it to be actually planned. And there's broadly an 8-week cycle before it comes into a warehouse. So imagine that from a consumer point of view. So just because you can't get it onto a plan, or you haven't got it in a warehouse, I can either have a service of next day, 2 to 3 weeks, or 8 weeks. That's crazy, but that's what we're doing. So I introduced what you call a postponement strategy, which is an aspect of Agile, which is to say that this is a range of products that are normally fielded to customers. Rather than having us make them to order and then the customer having an 8-week time, we're positioned a lot of these things close to the warehouse. And when the order comes in, it needs to be zinc dipped and fitted with a different fitting. We can do that in real time, get that into warehouse maybe the next day, and then it can fall into the way that we're trying to present ourselves to the customer, which I'm moving from a chaotic thing to a 5-day cycle that you order on a Monday, you get it on a Friday. And that was very successful. That was a version of Agile using what we call a postponement strategy, which is deferring the point of ultimate customization until the latest point in the overall order cycle.
So again, in some cases, the machinery doesn't need to change. It's just the planning around it.
Yeah.
Okay, this is really interesting. I didn't raise this question with you, but again, going off piece, I noticed that Adidas had their speed factories. They opened those. I think they had one in Germany and one in Atlanta. They opened them and I was really excited about them. And then they closed them. Yeah. Just another example, Adidas years ago had just a small pop-up that actually made sweaters for people on the spot.
Yeah.
It took about 2 hours. So when it came out, I think that was 2017 maybe, yeah. I was saying this is the future. All these stores are going to make things like this in the future. There's, I think, a couple of stores that do something unspun. They'll scan your body. They make jeans. They'll scan your body in the shop, but you still have to wait 6 weeks for the jeans to be made off-site somewhere. So we're a long way away, the vision that Adidas shared with us. I keep thinking this is where production is going, but there are no practical examples of this.
When you're looking at an automation project like a warehouse, you've got to be thinking about 5 or 7 year recovery, and you've got to believe the mix and the demand pattern is broadly going to be stable. Unless you have very good flexibility within the architecture of the automation. So if you're using like a micro fulfillment center, they have some certain limits about what you can actually put into one of the totes in terms of weight, maybe cube and stuff like that. So if your mix changes and you end up with higher cube products, suddenly the automation is kind of redundant. You can't use it. Or if you go the other way, if you go into lots of smaller items which don't perhaps move so fast, but where you try to proliferate the SKU range, actually you now need to add modules to this and join them all up somehow, a bit of software and physical racking or whatever it is. And suddenly that footprint, which you thought was like 5,000 square foot, and you had your whole SKU range in there, suddenly it needs to be 10,000. We need to knock this wall down in that store, if it's in the back of the store, and push that down and then create the space. It's not easy to do that without major disruption. If you're going to automate with an agile mindset, you say, right, what are all the scenarios we could face? We might actually today, we might need 5,000, but we're going to build it for 10,000 because it's a lot cheaper at this design stage to do that than it is to add it on later. It's very disruptive, especially when you're facing the pandemic and all that stuff. You won't have time to think. You'll be too busy doing. So you need to build the capability or the capacity to be able to just move quickly, think quickly about this problem.
I'm realizing there's at the moment maybe a big conflict between automation and flexibility. That they're both attractive for different reasons, but it's only when we have incredibly sophisticated robots that will be able to do both. Maybe the Adidas model was not flexible enough and they got caught out. That's really interesting.
It might be literally a mix change or a volume change or combination, and it just threw them to one side and said, well, our solution doesn't have that degree of flexibility to easily cope with that, because they were maybe, I'm just speculating, maybe they didn't do that scenario plan. What might happen around here? What's the ins and outs, and what's the worst case, best case, and what's all the other variants of this? And then reduce that into a solution that can cope easily with these different things, even though you may have lots of areas within that facility which are empty, which we don't use, but we're going to use when it happens.
That's really interesting. And do you have any thoughts on why we haven't seen this future of things being made in store yet, or locally? I guess these things are slow to make, they're expensive to make, but I don't know. I've been predicting this for years, but it hasn't emerged yet. So I don't know if you have any more to
Yeah.
tell me about
I
that.
don't do my normal narrative on this. That so many surveys, especially during a pandemic, they go and ask people, and typically, I guess millennials, do you think buying local is important? Oh yeah, definitely. Would you be prepared to pay a little bit more if you knew it was going to be made local and it's supporting local tradespeople and artisans? Definitely tick. There's two things going on. There's performative answering. So yes, it sounds like a great concept. Yeah, of course I want local people being employed, keeping busy. It's great staff. And then companies are trapped into this ROI kind of way of thinking. It's short term, got our next quarter, we've got to get some results coming up. We can't spend money on that. We haven't got the money, physical cash flow to invest in this. So let's just carry on. And it's worse than that, because when we get to Prime Day, the very same people say, well, I want more local, or pay a little bit more. They're in there tapping away without the consequence of all those orders going in, or that pollution from last mile vehicles. I think there's too many narratives running on this for us to move forward. The difficulty we face in Canada in things that making apparel is because we've outsourced most of our production to Vietnam, Bangladesh, China, wherever, into the Far East, is that our tradespeople have become less and less and less and more scarce. So even if we could bring stuff back, we'd have to train people. We'd have to bring people from maybe Vietnam over and sort of show us what you've been doing and learn again.
Your 3 steps, your 5 things to think about are really, really great. Are there any other kind of classic recommendations? So let's say big retailer invites you to come into a project. What are the classic things you butt up against?
It's all about the mindset and the culture. How committed are they to this? Because it could be quite expensive very quickly. And have they got the runway to actually invest in that way? Have they got the cash flow, firstly? And two, have they got the commitment to make these changes? Because this isn't going to go away. Just because we had the last big pandemic, the Spanish flu, 100 years ago, we've had a series of epidemics. We've had, including COVID, we had 5 in the last 20 years. Mindset is the cash flow and the commitment to making investments in things that don't make sense right now from a traditional mindset, but from a agile mindset make complete sense. It gives us protection. Another area that is often a reaction to this whole situation is like, come out of China and make it local. Well, I actually don't think that's the right response. I think we've got to look at what we can do locally. If we look at the value chain, where's the bits that China needs to carry on doing? But we need to have enough of that stock onshore here domestically that we carry on doing the value added stuff domestically. You can do either or kind of thing, but I think that's reckless. I think that you have to have a very kind of intelligent, detailed understanding of how does the value get created in a consumer's mind, and then work out what part of that can we actually bring local and what do we still need to outsource. One of the things I didn't touch on so well in my 3rd step is the metrics. It's so easy for many companies to, and you'll know this as you wander around businesses, and particularly retailers, they like to measure things. It's great, but they measure things that are naturally occurring, and sometimes they put one figure on top of the other and come up with a statistic. Oh, that's moved. Yeah, but this is naturally occurring information. The real challenge to most businesses is, what questions do we need the answers to? And then how do we get that information? We already know what goes through the EPOS. We know, what our stock position. We know this, we know that. We know how many we picked yesterday. But this is just naturally flowing information. What we want to know is, what are our customers doing? How are their needs evolving, which aren't necessarily naturally occurring? We need to know, are we resilient? What's our KPIs about resiliency? So we need to really look, as part of that 3rd step, the implementing systems, is providing visibility and then trying to figure out what questions we should be asking of ourselves on a regular basis. Doing a dig deep to get that data and then putting that into a scorecard that's actually making sense and telling us what we really need to know in the business, not not just collecting data and putting some interesting stats together and say, oh, look, scorecard, it's 90.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
It's 90. Fantastic. I had no idea what I've just said.
Brilliant. Yeah. And anything else you want to add?
The movement to Agile is a very considered step. It's not one that you just throw a bit of labor around and suddenly you're Agile. I'd like that point to be taken away, that these are 3 very kind of management time intensive steps to get to be Agile, to be very robust and resilient in how you serve your customers, how you continue to serve the customer. The customer doesn't care that there's a geopolitical thing going off and the borders are cut. They don't care. They'll find another source. And if you're trying to build a very strong relationship with your customer to build loyalty, you have to have a stock on your shelf or on your website when they expect it to be there. It doesn't matter what you're facing. And one of the ways of overcoming those things that get in the way is to adopt an Agile mindset and develop those Agile capabilities and capacities through developing different ways of looking at the world, different systems to integrate how your extended supply chain actually works together. And the big win, the consumer wins all the time because you're giving a great service. But the big win for the whole retail ecosystem is we're actually joined up on this.
Cool. Well, thank you for that. That was, really, really interesting. Really nice to get a few kind of structured things to be able to share with people. We'll keep fingers crossed that we get a good response from the world for this piece. But yeah, thanks for your time. I'll see you soon.
All right.
Thanks.
Cheers, Kate. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening today. I hope the information has been valuable for you and your team. You can connect with me via the website retail.ca and go to the contact page, or via LinkedIn by typing linkedin.com/in/last-mile. Look forward to hearing from you and playing an active part with your supply chain and your business's transformation as you start to act boldly, think big, scale, adapt, and win.